everyone. This is Jenny from the Narrate team. For the final week of Narrate series Focused, Josh spoke to how technology affects our relationships, particularly our conversation.
Hey, good morning. It's good to see you. It's balmy out there. When I pulled up this morning at 5:20, it was 59 degrees. What is it, summer or what? It's good to see you. If we haven't met yet, my name is Josh, and I get to serve on staff here at Narrate. And one of the ways in which I get to serve is I occasionally get the opportunity to communicate with all of you in this setting. And with that said, for the past few weeks, we've been having this conversation titled Focused. And really the main question that we're trying to draw out of this series is, how is technology affecting our lives? Of course, there have been several positives that have come from technology. But what if there are also some negative implications as well? What if there are negative implications on how we work? What if technology can prove to be remarkably distracting in our ability to solve problems in work, to develop creative, original content with our work? What if technology is affecting even the way that we think? Because any down moment throughout our day, whether that's 2 minutes in a grocery store line or driving along the interstate, or sitting down because you were meeting someone at 5 o'clock and they don't show up until 5:10, and what if we're filling those times to think, those spaces, with getting on an iPhone app? What if it's inhibiting our ability to think? And then also, what if it's inhibiting our relationships, particularly how we love God and how we love people? Today we're going to talk specifically about how technology can be inhibitive with our conversations, with our true, face-to-face, sincere, heartfelt, empathetic conversations. And I experienced this just a few months ago. I was going on a run, and I caught the Helena Trail Rider, which, if you don't know what that is, that's a shuttle that runs people from various spots throughout town to different trails in the Helena Trail system. And it was a Friday morning, and I woke up really early to catch the Helena Trail Rider and got a ride to the start of this trail. And it's the Helena Ridge Trail, and I've run it quite a few times before. And really how it works is it's really steep right at first, and then it kind of flattens out and even drops down a little bit. And I'm looking at all the people in the bus that are with me in the Helena Trail Rider bus. And there's several runners, there's several bikers. And so I come to the conclusion, because I'm looking at all these bikers, that I'm probably going to beat them on the uphill, but then they're going to come flying 50 miles an hour behind me whenever we flatten out and start going on the downhill. So I remember intentionally thinking, I'm going to turn down my headphones just a little bit so that whenever I summit that hill, so that I can hear these people whenever they're coming up behind me, these bikers. And so go on the run and start climbing up the hill and summit the hill, and then immediately turn down my headphones so it's just a faint little bit of music or podcast, whatever I was listening to that morning. And then there's some spots on the Helena Ridge Trail where you can see for a really long ways away. You can see way down the trail. And I got to this one spot, and I saw this guy, and he must have gotten onto the trail a different way than I did, because I didn't see him on the bus. But he must have been, I'm not exaggerating, he must have been 3/4 of a mile away from me. And then this gross competitive part of me starts to come in, like, I'm going to kick his butt. And so I just start picking it up to catch this guy. And he's running pretty quickly. And so it took me a good 15, 16 minutes, a good couple miles before I finally got up behind him. And by the time that I got up behind him, I'm breathing like a werewolf, just, just right up on this guy. And then thinking that he would be able to hear me, he couldn't. He had headphones in as well, but obviously his music was a bit louder. And so I just kind of gently said, "Excuse me." And he didn't hear me. And so I was like, well, I'll just hang back behind this guy for a bit. And seriously, about 20 seconds later, he must have been listening to some kind of like rock music, because he throws up the rocker cymbals and goes, "Woo!" while he's running. And so I'm still running behind him. And I'm like, this is pretty entertaining. And so about a minute later, woo, he does it again. And he keeps doing it. I'm really bad at that. That's why I'm not a rocker. and I'm watching him, and after he did it 3 or 4 times, I started to feel like, okay, I'm really being creepy right now. I'm running right behind this guy, and he doesn't know that I'm there. And so I just yell out, "Excuse me!" And he hears me then, and he lets me pass on this really not very wide, very narrow single-track trail. Now, in his defense, to be fair, I do the same thing when I'm running alone, except it's the hip-hop music, so I'm more like this while I'm running. But anyway, so now that is an example of a conversation, and albeit that was a 5-6 word conversation tops. Excuse me, sure, go ahead. But that conversation was inhibited by technology, and of course that is a very insignificant effect on my life, really none at all. But then there's other moments in our lives in which technology can affect us in more real ways in our relationships. Have you ever been sitting down with someone, whether that's across a dinner table or over a cup of coffee, and they're repeatedly checking their phone? Have you been riding in a car with someone and you're trying to converse with them and they're continually looking at their phone? Have you ever worked with someone who seems to be perpetually stressed out? And perhaps that's due to the fact that they're continually distracted throughout the day. Technology can be inhibitive to having true, sincere relationship. Think about the dinner table and how a phone or a TV in the kitchen or an iPad with a couple of games on it can inhibit a family's capacity to have real, empathetic conversation with one another. Technology, of course, I don't want to knock on it too much because it has helped the world in so many significant good ways. But then what if there's also some negative implications on our ability to really converse with each other? Adam asked me before this series started to talk today and specifically to read a book in preparation for this morning. And that book is called Reclaiming Conversation. And it's by an author by the name of Sherry Turkle. She's a professor and researcher at MIT, which is essentially the Massachusetts version of MSU. Joking. I wish. But she's a researcher and professor there, and she wrote a book called Alone Together a few years ago. Many of you have probably heard of that. Narrate did a series on it a few years ago, and she just recently wrote a new book, this book called Reclaiming Conversation. And in this book, she really argues that technology is inhibiting our ability to be truly empathetic with one another, to feel what someone is feeling in a conversation, and also to express to someone what we're really feeling in a conversation. And she approaches it really with a more narrative-based style. The last 80 pages of the book are just footnotes with this study, this study, this study, this study. So it's plenty scientific, but in the heart of the book, she really just shares stories after stories as she was preparing and researching and writing this book of people that she interviewed and talked with them about how technology has affected their relationships. So that's students, that's teachers, that's romantic relationships, that's family dynamics. And she is drawing themes from all of these conversations, these interviews that she had, and learning about the ways in which technology has affected their ability to converse with each other. And she really approaches it by discussing 3 chairs. And the first chair, she calls it one chair. And you can stay on this slide, but the one chair deals with solitude, and then there's 2 chairs. And 2 chairs involves your closest relationships, family, friends, and romantic relationships. And then 3 chairs involve society, your perimeter friends, whether that's someone that you work with or someone who works at the coffee shop that you frequent often, or people that you talk to on Sundays but don't really have a super close relationship with. That chair as well involves those perimeter societal relationships. But in this first chair, one chair, she deals with solitude. And she discusses that We have become, due to technology, so incapable of self-reflection and introspection because we are continually filling the space with some form of technology. We are incapable of being alone, and therefore incapable of self-reflection, and therefore incapable of knowing who we really are and what we really enjoy and what types of people we get along with the best. She says it really well in one quote from that section of the book. She says, "Afraid of being alone, we struggle to pay attention to ourselves. And what suffers is our ability to pay attention to each other. If we can't find our own center in solitude, we lose confidence in what we have to offer others." We have lost, she argues, due to technology, the ability to be alone and therefore the ability to know ourselves, to have a conversation with ourselves. This section of the book I particularly love because it's like the one strength I have. I'm jacked up in every other way, but I'm so skilled at being alone. Now, it was just funny. just a few years ago, I was going to go study with a friend, and her and I were like, let's meet at like 7 p.m., but I was going to be a bit late, and so I texted her, hey, I'm going to be a bit late. And she's like, that's cool, I'll just get started. It was at the MSU library, is where we were going to meet. And so I show up, 7:25 or so, and she asked me, hey, where were you at? And I said, I was just getting some dinner. She's like, oh, okay, where's it at? You didn't bring your food to the library with you? I said, no, yeah, I ate it there. I went to Wendy's, ashamedly, but went to Wendy's. I'm just going to own it right now. And she's like, I went to Wendy's, and she said, where's your food? And I said, well, I ate it there. He's like, did you go with someone? No. You sat at Wendy's and ate a meal by yourself? Yeah, totally. It was awesome. She's like, you are so strange. But anyway, embracing my awkwardness, Sherry Turkle quotes a study in this section on solitude. And in this study, they took a group of people, and this group of people they told them they're going to be alone for 15 minutes. No phone, no book, nothing to entertain them, nothing to interact with. They're going to be alone for 15 minutes, just a quarter of an hour. But there is one thing. If you get so bored, there's a little button you can push, and it'll send an electroshock through your body. And so obviously it wasn't very insignificant. And they asked everyone in this study, will you electrocute yourself? And everyone said, absolutely not. Why would I do that? That's stupid. It's only 15 minutes. And so they put everyone in their room, and they're just sitting there watching them. A few minutes go by, and a guy's like, well, I've been alone for a few minutes. I might as well be dead. I guess I'll just go ahead and push this electroshock button. And so he pushed it. And then another minute later, another person did it. And then minute later, another person did it, to the point to where after the 15 minutes, over half of the people in that group had electrocuted themselves because they could not stand being alone for just 15 minutes. Now we think, wow, how absurd. But the thing is, what do we do whenever we've been in the grocery store line for 2 minutes? What do we do? It's crude, but what do we do whenever we go to the restroom? We forgot our phone. Oh no, what am I going to do? If you're anything like me, you grab the shampoo bottle and start learning about the chemical content that makes up your shampoo. Oh, psyllium methotrexate. All the chemists in here are like, what an idiot. We are incredibly unskilled because of technology at being alone. She goes on to the second chair, the two chairs. And the two chairs involves family, friendship, and romantic relationships. And it was honestly probably the most impactful part of the book for me. She says that the ability to listen to people, to be empathetic with people, to feel what they're feeling, and also communicate to them what you are feeling, it happens in these relationships. She pointed out that the human brain is wired in such a way that you learn emotion by looking at someone in their face and seeing what they are feeling. So if they are angry, then you might be put on the defensive a little bit or even retaliate to a certain degree. If they are showing love in their face, you learn, your emotion, your body, your mind learns the ability to show love back. If they are showing pain, your ability to share in that pain with them starts by looking them in the face. She quotes one psychiatrist by the name of Daniel Siegel, and he's a professor at UCLA's medical school. And in this study that he did on childhood development, he made mention of the value of eye contact on children and how it affects the way they are empathetic with other people in their middle school, high school careers, and after on into their work career. Daniel Siegel says this, that eye contact, repeated tens of thousands of times in the child's life, these small moments of mutual rapport transmit the best part of our humanity, our capacity for love, from one generation to the next. And so think about the dinner table, the living room, or the bedroom where there's a screen there. How much is face-to-face interaction happening, and therefore how much is learning how to be empathetic and feel what someone is feeling happening in that dynamic? She pointed out one statistic that probably was the most impactful sentence in the entire book for me. She said, this is the most impactful part of my research for me. She said that there's a 40% drop in empathy in college students in the past 20 years. 40%. And the majority of that 40% happening in the past 10 years, which, mind you, was whenever smartphones started to become available to us. 40%. Now, I know that for me, this is something that I have been impacted by. Sometimes people will be like, I'm not certain you're feeling what I'm communicating to you right now. I'll be completely honest. That's something that I have to wrestle with, that I have to manage in my own life. And I used to just blame it on, well, I have German roots. I'm cold and calculated. That's who I am. But what if it's the effect of technology on myself? And then, because we learn how to be empathetic in those closer relationships, it affects us in the 3 chairs as well, which is, you can go to that next slide, which is larger society. So it affects us in our relationships at work, with the people that we're not necessarily super close to, but it affects our ability to be productive together. It affects our ability to have conversations, small talk conversations with people on a Sunday. It affects students. It even affects teachers in the way they communicate with their students. A lack of empathy can affect us in our closer relationships as well as our broader perimeter relationships. And as I was reading this book over the past couple of weeks and thinking about different parts of the text that deal with this dynamic, this 1 chair, 2 chair, 3 chairs dynamic that Sherry Turkle talks about, there were several stories that kind of popped into my head, but there was one that I kept coming back to. And that story is about Jesus and his good friend named Lazarus. And in this story, Jesus is good friends with Lazarus and his 2 sisters, who are Mary and Martha. And Lazarus becomes deathly ill. And they know that Jesus has the capacity to heal Lazarus, but he's not there. And so he actually ends up passing away. And Mary and Martha are heartbroken about it. And they share with Jesus their heartbreak. And Jesus shares with them that there is a greater purpose in this. And ends up actually, it's one of the most significant miracles of Jesus' narrative, ends up actually resurrecting Lazarus from death to life. And in that story, we see all 3 of these chairs mentioned. The 1 chair, the solitude. So whenever Jesus, throughout Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he continually sought solitude. In fact, over those 4 books, those 4 biblical, historical narratives of Jesus' life, he seeks solitude 23 times. He tells his friends and loved ones, his perimeter friends, I need to still off for a while and just be alone. And during those moments of being alone, he recenters himself on his purpose. And you see that happening in his conversations with Mary and Martha and others that are surrounding Lazarus' death. Jesus, if you were here, you could have healed him. And he responds with them, there is a greater purpose here. Despite the fact that he was experiencing some forms of peer pressure, for want of a better term, he was centering himself on the purpose that was supposed to be happening in this story due to his solitude. And then he interacts with Mary and Martha, and they're in pain. And he feels their pain. And it's probably the most explicit example, one of the most explicit examples of Jesus' emotion in the text. It says that Jesus felt their pain and he started to cry. In fact, to the point to where that the other people that were surrounding this event, so to speak, the people that were surrounding Jesus and Mary and Martha and Lazarus' tomb, they saw Jesus heartbroken over Mary and Martha, and they say to themselves that see how much he loved them. He loved him, Lazarus. The text says this. After she, that's Martha, had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher, that's Jesus, is here, and she said, and is asking for you. And when Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews, this is family and friends that are mourning with Mary and Martha, who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. And when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, you can just feel the emotion in this. She fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. We've all gone through that experience as well, right? God, if you had come through, if you are God and you are truly all-powerful, if you had come through, this would not be happening right now. And when Jesus saw her weeping, visually saw her, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and trouble. Looking at their faces, seeing the pain that they're in. Where have you laid him, he asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. And then the Jews said, see how he loved him. The observation of emotion, whether it was Jesus observing Mary or the three people, the people surrounding Jesus in that moment, observing his heartbreak. They were feeling empathy in that moment because they were visually seeing what was going on. This couldn't have happened through an iMessage stream, through an iMessage group chat, through an email thread, through a Facebook message, through a Twitter hashtag. According to Sherry Turkle, their ability to be empathetic toward one another is due to the fact that they were physically seeing each other and seeing what was going on in their hearts by what was shown in their faces. It kind of begs the question that we've been coming back to throughout this series, and that is, if loving God involves loving people, and loving God, then it must mean that loving God happens through conversation and through holding the distraction of technology away from our minds just for a moment so we can converse with one another. The text says this in Luke 10, we've read this verse often, that love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then that goes to the question, what does it mean to love God with your mind? What if we are inhibiting our conversation and therefore inhibiting our ability to be empathetic toward one another because our minds are consumed continually with some form of a technological platform, some screen. When I was in high school, I went through some struggles that I thought at the time were pretty specific to me, but the more I've learned, the more I've grown, I've understood that a lot of these circumstances were very universal for many high school students. But the one thing that was hard for me is I really couldn't share my difficulties with anybody. I didn't have any older siblings, so I couldn't share with anyone older than me. I had one younger brother, but he was just so much younger than me. He was 8 years younger than me. So when I was 15, he's 7. So I wasn't going to have a conversation with him, So, and then also we moved around a fair amount. And so because of that and the fact that I'm a fairly private person, I hadn't developed any relationships in which there was a great deal of trust there. And I think that a lot of young people, they have a hard time exposing themselves because there's some form of shame there. And then the more you grow up, the more you realize, everyone's jacked up too, so I can be honest about myself. But I just didn't share much with anybody to the point to where I kind of hit a tipping point. And I met with I mentioned to a mentor one day at church. His name was Russ. And I said, Russ, can we just meet and talk? And he could tell that something was going on. And so he said, sure. And so that was on a Sunday. Literally the next day, we met at the Bagel Company there just on Last Chance Gulch. And I started to talk to him. And just honestly, I prepared myself to dump what I was dealing with on him. And so I started to share with him. And started to cry, really deeply, sincerely cry. And I feel like every time I speak, I'm talking about some story where I cry. I don't cry that much. It's just it's coincidence. But started to sob. And then I looked at Russ's face, and he looked at mine. And I could see in his face that he was sharing in my pain with me. And he started to tear up as well. And just to hear him with that face, just to hear him say, I'm so sorry. For me, that was honestly a revolutionary moment in my life because I had gone so many years without sharing with anyone, keeping it to myself. And to finally have that moment where someone is sharing this load of pain with me. I remember that conversation, it honestly changed my world. It's one of the most significant conversations I've had in my entire life. And for months, I felt freer than I had in years. Because finally, I was communicating what I was feeling to someone else, and they were being empathetic toward me. Reminds me of these couple of camps that we had this past summer. We had our middle school camp in early July and our high school camp in latter July. And in early July, with the middle schoolers, we went up to Park Lake. And so because there's no reception, there's no phones and screens and so on. And at this camp, we just ran them ragged. I mean, just, hiking and swimming and fishing and climbing and frisbee golf and or what is it, Falf? Yeah, that game. We just ran them ragged. We're getting barely any sleep, and everyone smelt. But we had, really a fun time. But I expected that, they're going to get tired of this. And so I remember on the last night, just kind of talking with all the students. We're all gathered together, students and leaders, and I said, well, guys, this is our last night. We're going to wake up tomorrow morning and eat some breakfast and pack up and head out. And I expected half of the kids to be like, all right, I get to take a shower. I don't know if middle schoolers want to take showers, but all right. That was that was rude. Sorry. But I figured they'd be like, all right. And the collective response from that group of people was, oh, really? And I think it's because we got to have an opportunity to really converse with one another for 3 whole days, no devices, really look at one another and enjoy one another and be empathetic toward one another. And then in the high school camp as well. This is such a fun time. In fact, we developed a closeness there that I haven't experienced with our students before then. And I remember Kate's made fun of me about this. She asked me, how did it go? The first meeting that we had after getting back from high school camp. And I just told her, we were such a unit. We were just together. We were one. And it showed in like our games because I would play the role of coach and, be like four-sided kickball and be like, all right, triangle offense, which has nothing, not applicable at all. But I just wanted to say things. And we were this united team, to the point to where we were so united that other campers from other churches were approaching me like, do you guys practice for this all year? And I was like, dude, yeah, we practice 51 weeks a year to be ready for this one. But we developed a closeness there. The vast majorities of our breakfast, lunches, and dinners over that 5-day period were together. We could converse with one another. And the vulnerability and the empathy that grew over the course of that week, the first couple of days, not much at all. By the end of the week, our muscles of vulnerability and empathy were strong. And I have to think that at least in part, perhaps not the only reason, but at least one of the reasons is because we finally got away from our darn screens for a little bit. Now, that week of camp gives me hope because, like I said, at the beginning part of the week, not much vulnerability, not much empathy. But just like we've been talking about over the past few months, our brains are plastic. It's called neuroplasticity. And as we exercise empathy and vulnerability, we gain the capacity to become those things and become those things more and more. And so what if for some of us who have relationships that are greatly inhibited by technology, and that's by our own use of technology, what if for some of us we can start to develop those muscles of really listening to someone, to share in their pain, and also to share with them our own pain? What if that can come in time? And so I really just want to identify a person. Rather than a to-do, I want to identify a person in a question that hopefully can be helpful. And that's what one relationship in your life would benefit from reclaiming conversation. Step away from technology for a minute and just look that person in the face and see what they're feeling. And share with them what you're feeling. And what if in that, you can develop skills that will be helpful to your career, helpful to the way, to your family dynamics, and also helpful to you because you're living a more relationally fulfilled life. We're going to end on a video which details a story of a student. Her name is Grace. And Grace is one of those students who, she's just, you can depend on her, And I have to think that my trust in her is due to the fact that many people have been investing in her for years. And in that investment, there's been a great deal of face-to-face conversation. So let's go to that video.
Hi, I'm Grace Bender. I'm 16 years old and I'm a junior at Capitol High School. Growing up, my parents never really forced any religion on us, or they didn't make us attend any specific churches, but they did set a solid foundation in making sure that we had the tools to discover and believe in what we wanted. I grew up knowing and always believing that there was a God, but I never really wanted to explore and know what that meant until Narrate came along. I've been attending Narrate for about 3 years now. I started going to the youth group with some of my friends, and ever since then I can't get away. I'm a preschool teacher on Sundays, and this year I'm going to be a middle school youth group leader. I don't think I would have been brave enough to do those things if it wasn't for Narrate and the impact that it has had on my journey. If I had to think of one moment when I was like, okay, I think this Jesus thing is real and it's something I want to pay attention to, it was probably when I was in 7th grade and I was going through a really hard time in my life and I was out of answers for the problems that I was having. So I remember laying on my bedroom floor looking up at the ceiling and just saying, God, help me with this situation. I trust you. It's hard to explain what that experience was like, but I just knew he was someone that I wanted to know. Over the past few years, Narrate has helped me grow closer to God and learn more who he is. Through this journey, I've met some of my best friends and some absolutely amazing role models in my life. There are a lot of people I want to thank, but to name a few here at Narrate, Bethany Dickin, Caleb Coder, Colleen Martin, and Josh Sonnenberg. Having the opportunity to meet with these people every week and just feel loved and cared for has really helped me grow in my journey. I'm excited to be baptized and share with you my love for Jesus as my Lord and Savior.
So can we pray really quick? God, thanks so much for your example in your son Jesus and the empathy he had toward his loved ones, his friends, and the fact, God, that people were observing him and also feeling empathy for him. God, I pray that we would embrace these chairs, that we would take advantage of moments of solitude and really think about who we are in you and what our purpose in our lives really is. God, that we would look at our loved ones in their face and learn to feel what they're feeling and share what we are feeling. And God, trust that will help us in our broader perimeter relationships as well. Help us, God, to reclaim conversation. Thank you for your grace. Amen.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.